Hello, my name's Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and I'm continuing my discussion on the assassination of John F. Kennedy, our 35th president, and I've been, uh, debunking the conspiracy theories surrounding the assassination of President Kennedy. Now, JFK is not our only president who's been assassinated, right? Uh, of all the assassinated presidents and assassination attempts, the assassination of John F. Kennedy is, in fact, the only one that's controversial. I mean, uh, there's no controversy surrounding the assassination of uh, uh, Abraham Lincoln, the first president to be assassinated. It was John Wilkes Booth and his co-conspirators. They were tried. They were executed. Um, uh, the same thing with the assassination of President James Garfield, our 20th president. His assassin was Charles Guiteau, who was, he was tried, executed. The same thing with our 25th president, William McKinley, who was assassinated by an anarchist. Same thing. There's no controversy. But the only president whose assassination raises so much controversy is JFK. Even with the failed assassination attempt on our 40th president, Ronald Reagan, that's Hinckley, there's no conspiracy theory surrounding that failed attempt. The reason why there's conspiracy surrounding JFK's assassination is in part because uh, the suspect, that's Lee Harvey Oswald, who was arrested and arraigned, uh, for assassinating JFK, was killed 2 days after while he was held in police custody by Jack Ruby. So that's a reason why till today they say about 65%. A recent poll, 2023 poll, shows that about 65% of Americans believe Lee Harvey Oswald was not the lone gunman, and he was involved in a conspiracy. That there was a conspiracy to assassinate John F. Kennedy. Uh, I did a video earlier, debunking the reckless conspiracy theory that the Mossad or the Israelis, assassinated JFK in order to develop their nuclear capacity. I've done a video. Now, another thing that may have fueled that conspiracy theory that that the Israelis may have been involved, of course, is the fact that the person who killed Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, happened to be Jewish, and he was known to be very pro-Israel. Jack Ruby, his real name was Jacob Rubenstein. Jacob Rubenstein. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. So he was known to be very sensitive regarding anti-Semitism, and they say that at the time of JFK's assassination, psychiatrists have said that it was a reaction by him. It was a backlash because he thought that there would be a backlash against Jewish people, and they would lay the blame for the assassination of JFK on Jewish people. That it was a sign of anti-Semitism. So that's the speculation, but the reason he gave for actually killing Lee Harvey Oswald, he claims that he did it to spare uh, uh, Jackie Kennedy the trauma of the trial that would have ensued. So he claims he did it on compassionate grounds, considering uh, Jackie Kennedy and her family. So, however, it's kind of interesting, that uh, you know Jack Ruby, we don't have to take his reasons at at face value, considering his psychiatrist and his attorney said he was legally insane, and while he was actually in custody he tried to commit suicide. He said he tried to kill himself using his clothes, and that he would bang his head against the wall. So they said he was insane, and there are signs that he did suffer a mental illness. And his mother was committed to a psychiatric hospital in the last years. But I have to be very cautious. That's I hate it when people just dismiss people who are mentally ill and stigmatize them like they can't make rational decisions, or all their actions or any of their actions are necessarily irrational. Let me put it out there. Some of our presidents have actually been, it's been said that they suffered from mental illness. Abraham Lincoln is said to have been manic depressive. People are very, he's the biographer of uh, uh, John Adams, was convinced that, John Adams was bipolar. And they say Theodore Roosevelt was bipolar. So people can make very rational, sane decisions, even despite the fact that they may suffer from mental illnesses, right? So, however, something I want to do today is provide the background rather than just spend time debunking things. I'm going to probably I'll do a subsequent video and provide my analysis, but I want to give the history, the backstory, and regarding uh, what may have motivated uh, Jack Ruby's concerns about anti-Semitism and communism. Lee Harvey Oswald was ostensibly a defector and an avowed communist, right? That's what he passed off on. Interestingly, though, there's information that came out that Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald were actually connected, right? So I'm going to give the backstory. So it's kind of interesting that uh, Lee Harvey Oswald was supposed to have shared a cell with a guy called John Elrod. John Elrod was supposed to have been a tramp, an alcoholic, but he subsequently, told the FBI. Although that was about a year later, in like 1964, August 1964, he told the FBI that he had shared a cell with Lee Harvey Oswald when he was being arraigned, when he was being detained for the assassination of JFK. And Lee Harvey Oswald had told him that he had been in a meeting a few days before with Jack Ruby. So while both of them were in jail together, they there were two other guys that shared this cell block with them, and both of them had been arrested apparently on November 18, 20 and November 18, 1963, in a in a you know in a bust of a gun running ring by the FBI. So um, so Elrod claims that Lee Harvey Oswald uh, said he noticed, a guy with a smashed up face, right? And his name was Miller, and another guy called who was, in shared the cell block with them. His name uh, was Witter. Witter was supposed to have been the mechanic of Jack Ruby. They were acquaintances, right? And so Lee Harvey Oswald, according to Elrod, had been in a meeting a few days before, and they were planning uh, on doing a gun deal. They were going to sell stolen guns, and they were apparently unknowingly going to be selling stolen guns to an undercover ATF agent. So ATF, that's the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Its precursor actually was the Bureau of alcohol and tobacco, and it was within the Treasury Department. But this guy called, his name was Ellsworth, so he was an agent and he was posing undercover as a corrupt cop who was trying to get into gun running, right? That's the sale and the trafficking of illegal arms. And so he knew of, he was investigating this guy, trying to catch a guy called he was a gun shop owner, and his name was Mason. And Mason apparently was also being investigated by the FBI, right, regarding another gun deal he was doing concerning a second bay of pigs, right? There was supposed to be a second bay of pigs, and this guy Mason was supposed to be supplying guns for this operation, a second bay of pigs. So while this ATF agent Ellsworth was secretly investigating, trying to entrap and arrest Mason. He was trying to arrest Mason for, violating federal, gun trafficking statutes or whatever, violating, for sale of stolen guns. So it was about these guns that were supposed to have been stolen and from, one of the military bases, Fort Hood. And there was another guy, they had an inside guy, ostensibly an inside guy called, he was an army captain and arms expert. He was supposed to be the middleman. That's George Nanti was his name. And so Mason, the gun shop owner, was supposed to be connecting the undercover agents, that's Ellsworth of the ATF, with this George Nanti, an army captain at Fort Hood, right? So they had been illegally moving ordnance from Fort Hood, and there was an investigation. The FBI was also involved. Anyway, ordnance, that's material, that's arms, military weapons and things like that, right? So Ellsworth was acting as an undercover guy, pretending that he wanted to buy a lot of guns. This was on November 18, 1963. And however, there was another FBI guy, incidentally, his name was Hosty. He was interested, he was investigating this same Mason guy regarding the second bay of pigs. And this Mason guy, was an FBI guy who was also, he had contact with Lee Harvey Oswald. And he had been trying to find out if Lee Harvey Oswald was working on, bizarrely, some kind of classified information, which indicates that, what people have been suggesting, that Lee Harvey Oswald was probably working for the FBI or the CIA when he was sent over to, he was some kind of agent when he was sent over to, as a fake defector, possibly to the Soviet Union. So this Costi guy was, he had been trying to get in touch with Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald was supposed to have tried to, been angry with him and gone to the FBI office in Dallas, sending him a note warning him to stay off his wife. He should stop harassing his wife, So in any event, the gun deal that was supposed to go off between the Ellsworth, the undercover ATF guy, posing as a corrupt cop, and Mason's men, was intercepted by the FBI and Dallas police, right, on November 18. So they caught Miller, the two guys. They were associates of Jack Ruby, right, and Witter. Witter was Jack Ruby's mechanic. And Elrod, who was in sharing a cell with Lee Harvey Oswald, right, when he was arrested for the assassination of JFK, Oswald was supposed to have told Elrod that, well, that he and uh, Jack Ruby had been in a meeting concerning gun running just a few days before, in terms concerning a gun deal. And so that might be an indication, you know, of why Jack Ruby may have been interested in killing Lee Harvey Oswald, because that would mean that Lee Harvey Oswald knew something that could implicate Jack Ruby, because Jack Ruby was not arrested. His acquaintances had been arrested, right? Because the FBI had intercepted the gun deal on November 18, 1963. So Witter, that's Jack Ruby's mechanic and acquaintance, and Miller's face was busted up because there was there was a car chase, right? When the FBI and the Dallas cops, detectives, when they intercepted them, they tried to ambush them, and so they sped off in their car. It was supposed to be a Thunderbird, and there was an accident. They hit a pole, and one of them, Miller, had his face smashed in. And so they said, Elrod was saying that Lee Harvey Oswald was saying that, hey, even though his face is messed up, he recognizes him because they had met together, in a motel, and they'd had a transaction with Jack Ruby, and money had been paid. So bizarrely, so there was a connection between Jack Ruby and Lee Oswald, but of course, the FBI dismissed this as hearsay and in their notes they called Lee Harvey Oswald as an unknown inmate, because he was deceased by this time, and so they said, well, it was hearsay because they dismissed Elrod's word as being hearsay. So that's kind of bizarre. So it's interesting that there was talk of a second planned Cuban invasion, and Jack Ruby was apparently involved in this, right? Or this Mason guy, the gun runner and gun shop owner, right? Because if you recall, I'd done a video and I discussed how the resolution to the Cuban Missile Crisis was that the USSR agreed to remove its missile installation in Cuba and to desist from that. In turn, that the U.S. would also remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey, and at the same time, it would stop its attempts to assassinate and overthrow Fidel Castro, that they would no longer do another invasion of Cuba. So that could have been a motive, right, for the Soviets to have, assassinated John F. Kennedy, right? Again, people, as the former CIA director, James Woolsey, indicates that Oswald was working for the Soviets. Oswald was in the USSR for 2.5 years. He may have turned. He had tried to commit suicide. So the MK Ultra and mind control and things that the CIA was known to have been involved in, they were actually motivated by the Soviets programs, the Soviets and Chinese. They were, they had these torture techniques and hypnotic techniques and, use of drugs, hallucinogens and things like that, LSD, whatever, to get people, to turn and things like that. And so even though Lee Harvey Oswald, this is just speculation, even if he may have been sent as an agent for the U.S. as a fake defector, because again the U.S. was adapting the methods of its enemy, the KGB, the USSR, and so if he was sent as a fake defector, he may have been turned, and he came back and assassinated JFK. In any event, something I wanted to focus on, I wanted to talk about the situation regarding anti-Semitism in the USSR, because I've been talking about I've done an earlier video just discussing how part of the Marxist-Leninist ideology was that it's it was supposed to prioritize non-ethnicity, right? It espoused that national identity, nationalities were an element of bourgeois capitalism and things like that, right? Of the ruling class, in order to exploit, manipulate, and oppress the ruling class, and to remove class consciousness and let the proletariat be more focused on national identity. So this was what Marxist-Leninism propounded. However, when Joseph Stalin, became when he was dictator, we see that he was now he undertook a series of anti-Semitic campaigns and purges in the USSR, and so this may have been part of what made Jack Ruby very sensitive to anti-Semitism. It's interesting though that he would have been acquainted or been involved with Lee Harvey Oswald, who was an avowed, at least an ostensible communist at the time. So did he react, out of anger, out of hatred, out of realization that Lee Harvey Oswald was a communist who was part of the persecution of Jewish people in the Soviet Union. So let me give the backdrop anyway in what was going on in the USSR. So in 1939, Stalin started changing, a lot of the Marxist-Leninist doctrine, during the Nazi era. So he got into what was called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was a non-aggression pact, right? And that's Russia and the USSR and Nazi Germany agreed not to go to war or fight each other for 10 years, right? They say that Stalin really entered this pact as a temporary, as an expedient, so he could build up his the Soviet military. But in any event, in order to appease Hitler, Stalin is said to have ordered a purge of Jewish people in the foreign ministry. So that was in 1939, and so there were a number of other purges of Jewish people in Soviet Russia at the time. One of them also was the purging of the Jewish anti-fascist committee. So Stalin had supported this Jewish anti-fascist committee during the Second World War. But once the Second World War was over, he started to attack them, and especially with the creation of Israel in 1948, Stalin was very anti-Israel, and he actually viewed Zionism as a threat to Soviet Russia. He viewed it as a threat and disloyalty to Soviet Russia at the time, and so he ordered the arrest of the leadership of and the disbandment of the Jewish anti-fascist committee, which he had used when it was convenient for him. So he ordered their arrest, and in fact, the chairman was assassinated on the orders of Stalin. His name was Solomon Michaels. He was an actor. He was a very famous actor in Russia. He was assassinated, and there was what's called the Night of the Murdered Poets, in which 26 thespians were killed in 1952. So Stalin, he ordered this. He undertook this purge of Jewish people, and then in 1953, to top it off, he in 1953 he there was what was called the Doctor's Plot. He ordered the arrest, rounding up an arrest of prominent Jewish doctors, and this was a fabricated conspiracy. After Stalin was dead, it was revealed by his head of the secret police, Beria, that it was actually a fabricated conspiracy just to attack Jewish people, and so Stalin had claimed that that there was a plot by Jewish doctors to assassinate Soviet, top Soviet leaders, and so he rounded them up, and that was in 1953, and that was supposed to have been the prelude to a mass deportation of Jewish people to the gulags, and Siberia. However, Stalin would die, in March 1953, and that was forestalled. So there was all this anti-Semitic attack, that Jewish people were suffering in the USSR, and again, Stalin was absolutely anti-Israel, anti-Zion. He viewed Zionism as a sign of disloyalty to communism, to Soviet USSR, and so you could see a motivation for the KGB folks. Of course, the KGB wasn't created until 1953, 1954 under that was under 1954 under Nikita Khrushchev, and so a reason to frame an assassination plot, the assassination of JFK, and frame Israel as being a mastermind behind it, because I'd done videos, debunking the notion that the Mossad were responsible. Because if the Mossad were responsible in a conspiracy, and why would they put the smoking gun in the hand of a Jewish man who's pro-Israel? That's Jack Ruby, because Jack Ruby is the one who ended up killing Lee Harvey Oswald. There would never have been a talk of a conspiracy if Lee Harvey Oswald had gone to trial, and there was sentencing. If it'd gone to trial, it'll be done. The reason why 65% of Americans still today believe there was a conspiracy, and is because Jack Ruby ended up, who was Jewish, ended up killing Lee Harvey Oswald, and he died in prison. Jack Ruby would die in 1967, January 1967. He had lung cancer, and he had died of a blood clot in his lungs. So I don't think the Mossad would have done something right and placed the smoking gun in the hand of a Jewish man who was pro-Israel, very pro-Israel, so that there would be a wave of anti-Semitism in America, and everybody would be talking about a conspiracy of Jewish people, and then it would jeopardize Israel's relationship with its ally, its main ally. That's been like a tower of protection, right? That's been, that's supplied aid. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, and you don't make your friends, you know, go to the corner of your enemies. So, in any event, um, so it's been, it's been very difficult to figure things out, especially with the cover-ups, right? Indeed, there have been cover-ups. There have been cover-ups after cover-up, right? Um, when they were investigating the FBI's contacts with Lee Harvey Oswald, it was found that the notes that were made were destroyed. You know, were destroyed later on, and also um, apparently uh, Army intelligence, U.S. Army intelligence, had a file on Lee Harvey Oswald prior to the assassination, right? So that which probably indicates, that he may have been, an undercover agent. He may have been a fake defector, and he turned. He was turned. He became a double agent. This, becoming double agents were very common during uh, the the Cold War era, right? There were double agents. There were triple agents, and remember, because of uh, the defectors, Yuri, Nosenko and Anatoly Golitsyn, you know, they had one had something to say. One person was saying, "Well, Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't a KGB agent." Somebody else was Golitsyn was saying, "Well, the USSR, the KGB, is actually sending fake defectors to spread disinformation and to destabilize the US." And there was James Angleton, who was CIA counterintelligence chief, who was very paranoid and very convinced that the CIA and top government, the White House, had been infiltrated with KGB agents and moles. So all of this was going on, around that time. So it was a very, there was a lot of hysteria, paranoia, suspicion going around. More than suspicion is an understatement, surrounding, the assassination of JFK at the time. But I'm gonna do another video. This has gotten, long, and do more analysis and why I don't think that the CIA was in fact involved. I don't think the CIA was involved in the assassination of JFK. Again, as I've said, possibly a double agent or a mole posing as a CIA. That's possible. That's another angle. And I'm wondering, when these people, like when bad actors or people, the mobsters or third parties, are claiming that they met with the CIA, that the CIA called them. How does the public think people meet with federal government agencies, right? Do people assume that maybe the CIA or the government will invite them over to their offices, to the building, and they're coming and they sit down, just to be able to prove? Because how do you know you're really talking to a CIA agent? I worked for the DOD and the Navy, and I know, I had a desk, a cubicle in the Pentagon at one time at the Navy, and I know that, people can't come from outside and have meetings, right, with people who are living there, unless you're a government official yourself, or unless you work with the government. So somebody from the outside is not going to come in to the building, so how do you know you're really meeting with a government agent, with a federal agent? They come to you, right, and then they present something. They don't give you business cards, because government agents don't carry that, right, unless they make their own cards. They'll show you an ID. These things can be fabricated, right? They can have a false ID, false badge, things like that, false business cards. You're right. So how do these people know that the people they make contact with are not posing as federal agents, as the FBI or as the CIA? How do they know that? They don't know, right? Because you don't know, these parties, if it's the mob is not going to go into Langley and be sitting down and be getting, and know for sure that, well, it is the CIA that got them to do this mission, this operation. No, the CIA is going to come to them, because then there's no way they're going to go into Langley. They're not going to go into if it's the military, they're not going to go into the Pentagon. That's not going to happen, right? So somebody's going to come out to you and, be making a representation that this is who they are, that they are from the government. And you can't really prove that they're from the government. Remember, the CIA, besides, operates under plausible deniability. You can't prove they're from the government. So that's the reason why a mole can be misrepresenting themselves. Talking about moles, I just remembered a movie that I'd watched, and it talks about moles domestically, right, in terms of domestic law enforcement, and it's The Departed. The Departed. I'm just going to quickly take time and talk about this, and I'll sign off. So The Departed, one of the best movies I ever watched, and I watched it while I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts at the time. The black governor, Deval Patrick was governor at the time, was a black governor, and so it was a fun time for me. So stars Leonardo DiCaprio, one of my favorite actors, and Matt Damon, one of my favorite actors, and there was Jack Nicholson, right? So it was about how there was an infiltration on two sides, right? There was a mole from organized crime, right? Boston organized crime. They had actually prepared someone and put him into Boston police. They cultivated him, right? Since childhood, cultivated him and, giving him the background. He didn't have any any apparent relationship with the mob, even though he was a plant of the mob, right? That's Matt Damon. So he had a background that they wanted. They were the ones who inserted him into the police force so he could be helping them out. He could alert them when there's a bust of their ring. There's they're trying to break them up and things like that. He could tip them off, right? And that's Matt Damon. So that's one way. So that's sort of the way a sleeper agent works. In this case, this was a domestic thing, a domestic infiltration of law enforcement, Boston police, right, by Boston organized crime. That's how it works, for instance, when the Soviets do it, the KGB, right? So they put in a sleeper agent, a mole. They groom that person, give him they're genuine papers, but they're not that person's papers. An American, so that they can actually verify that this person's legit. Person was born, so they grab somebody, that person's in all likelihood dead. They grab a dead person's papers, credentials, and they bring someone who looks similar, and that person grows up as that person, this false assumed identity, like the mole Conan Mulledy, right, who posed as Gordon Lonsdale. And there was also William Fisher, Rudolph, what was his name again? Rudolph Abel, right? So on the other side, there was also Leonardo DiCaprio, who wanted to become a cop. He passed. They decided that they were going to use him as an undercover agent. So they gave him a fake background, a fake identity. They arrested him, locked him up in jail, made him appear as a criminal, right? They erased, so there was nothing, none of his records showed that he was really a cop, right? Only the boss, only two people knew his real identity. the head of the police force there in Boston, the captain or whatever he was, and that was Martin Sheen, and his uh, his factotum, his assistant, who was played by Mark Wahlberg. They were the only two who knew his identity, right? And there was a secret file on him. I'll talk more on it in a subsequent video. So that's kind of how the moles and they were functioning. Nobody knows, and Leonardo DiCaprio was able to slip into the organized crime, and he was able uh, to be a part of the outfit, and he was reporting what was going on. So it's a very dangerous lifestyle, and being undercover. Um, There's a movie, Donnie Brasco, that was done by Johnny Depp. That was actually a real situation. An FBI guy who infiltrated the mob, and he was posing. His real name wasn't Donnie Brasco, but he was posing as as a mob. I think it was the which family did he infiltrate? I think it was one of the New York families. I think it was a Colombo crime family. Don't quote me on that. I'll check and correct myself if I'm wrong. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So this something like this may have happened, and that's why we have 65% of Americans still today say there was a conspiracy and Lee Harvey Oswald was not the lone gunman. In any event, my name is Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and I like also drew attention to call of law violations that I've been suffering in Montgomery County, Maryland. It's public corruption has held me captive for almost 3 years now. My rights have been violated. My Fourth Amendment rights were violated on May 16, 2023. My rights to privacy. I was raided, falsely imprisoned in my home, and I was shot in the head with a projectile by Montgomery County Police. And they released tear gas in my home. They also robbed me, subsequently. And to add insult to injury, they filed trumped up charges, falsified accusations, with trumped up charges against me in order to to prevent a prosecution of the offending police officers, and also to obstruct justice in federal complaints and investigations that were ongoing. I'm hoping for justice, because there's a lot of public corruption that's been denying me my rights, my equal protection of law, my due process rights. There's an instance of a corrupt judge, James Bonifant. He's acted fraudulently, and he's been committing fraud on the court. And I'm astonished. I have a law degree from George Washington University Law School, and I'm astonished by the public corruption that's been instantiated by Judge James Bonifant of Montgomery County. He's been doing full incompetency to stand trial orders. He's been lying in court outright, so that's fraud on the courts. And he's been showing this bias towards the state, and it appears he's been bribed, right? He's been bribed. The thing is, these things, the bribery of a judge, that's something that you need to be able to prove. But he's certainly co-opted the courts to the state attorney's office, which appears to be acting as an appendage for the Department of Defense and Department of Navy. I was swatted in a conspiracy to violate my civil rights and to obstruct justice. And Judge Bonifant has facilitated this. He's abused the Montgomery County courts to facilitate the violation of my rights and to prevent the EEOC and my ability to sue for misconduct and violation of my rights, discrimination, the discrimination for to seek redress for the discrimination I also suffered in the Department of Defense and Department of the Navy. I'm a law-abiding American citizen. It is astonishing that I'm experiencing this miscarriage of justice, and I hope the media, the press will get involved. My family is in Nigeria, and the falsified accusations and fabrications that have gone on, it is this sort of thing that we expect occurs in an authoritarian state like in the USSR. That's what the KGB was doing. That was what they masterminded, when they had apparatchiks. They used troikas, and they used bill of attenders there. They had these, they fabricate, they falsify accusations, and it's astonishing that this is what I've suffered in Montgomery County, Maryland. There was a fabrication of a peace order, an ex parte order was given, and I was locked up during this time. I was not able to defend myself. Judge Bonifant was telling outright lies, delusional lies, outright lies in courts, and it's astonishing how corrupt Montgomery County courts are, the criminal justice system. It's been co-opted by corrupt state attorney's office. Again, I'm seeking justice. As Martin Luther King is said to have said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and I'm seeking justice, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.